All right, today we are jumping into a really provocative book, J.J. Roberts' Sex 3.0. And its main idea? Well, it's that pretty much everything we've been taught to believe about love, sex, and relationships is built on a foundation that's just wrong. So, let's get into it.
The book kicks off with this zinger. It's a real challenge right from the get-go. If you find that sexual relationships are difficult, then your map sucks. Now, the author's point here isn't that you're broken or your partner is. It's that the actual map you're using to navigate the whole thing is fundamentally flawed. And this brings us to the book's absolute core metaphor, the map versus the territory. So think of it like this. The map is our collection of beliefs, everything we think we know about how relationships are supposed to work. But the territory, well, that's reality. That's how things actually are. And the argument is that most of us are walking around trying to navigate a complex modern city with a map drawn in the Middle Ages. It just doesn't work.
Okay, so let's dig into why our relationship map is so out of date. Where did all these rules come from in the first place?
To do that, we have to go back, way back to the beginning, to what the author calls Sex 1.0, or the natural state.
Just look at this timeline for a second. For 95% of human history, we lived as hunter-gatherers. This is the era the author calls Sex 1.0. This nomadic life is what forged our instincts. You see that tiny slice at the end? That's the age of property and all the relationship rules that came with it. It's an incredibly recent invention in the grand scheme of things.
And here's the key part about that Sex 1.0 world. There was no private property, no fences, no deeds, and because of that, there was also no concept of people as property. The book calls this an unfenced world, where relationships were just guided by our biology, not by social contracts about who owned whose sexuality.
But then, boom, the agricultural revolution happens, and it changes everything. This massive shift leads to the birth of Sex 2.0, which the author calls the normalized deal.
So what exactly is this Sex 2.0 deal? It all comes down to property. Once men had land and livestock and resources to pass on to the next generation, they suddenly had a huge new worry, what the book calls paternity concern. The question, how can I be 100% sure these kids are mine? And the solution society came up with for that problem, a contract we now call marriage.
This contract was a very clear two-sided exchange. For men, the deal was you provide security and resources. In return, you get exclusive sexual access so you can guarantee your children are yours. For women, the deal was you provide that exclusive sexual access, and in return, you and your kids get security and resources. This deal, the book argues, became the blueprint for our relationship map for the next 10,000 years.
But how do you make sure everybody actually follows this deal? The book says society came up with a very powerful enforcement tool. It calls relationship duress. This is all that collective pressure from your family, from movies, from culture that pushes everyone down the exact same path. Date, commit, get married. It's that voice in the back of your head that says, this is the only right way to do it.
And all this social pressure, it created a massive split. It basically fractured our sexuality into two conflicting planes of existence. On one side, you have the natural plane. This is defined by our biology, our evolutionary instincts. It's that unfenced world of sexual option. But on the other side, you have the normal plane. This is defined by society's rules, the fenced-in world of sexual ownership.
This conflict leads to another one of the book's most startling claims. The author argues that because enforced lifelong monogamy isn't our natural biological state, pretending that it is becomes, and I quote, a fraud on the self. It's an unnatural behavior that's only considered normal because of that immense social pressure, that relationship duress.
So all of this builds up to the author's central argument, that the Sex 2.0 deal, the map we've been using for millennia, is now completely obsolete.
And the logic for why it's obsolete is pretty simple. The two original pillars holding the whole deal up have basically crumbled. First, women can now get an education, have careers, and achieve their own financial security. They no longer need to trade their sexuality for it. And second, with cheap, incredibly accurate DNA testing, men no longer need to enforce sexual ownership just to guarantee paternity. The original reasons for the deal have vanished.
So if the old map is broken, what does the new one look like? This is where the book introduces its solution.
a new framework called Sex 3.0. Now, it's really important to understand that Sex 3.0 isn't another prescription. It's not telling you there's one new way to live your life. Instead, it's about giving people an honest, complete map, one that's totally free from the societal pressure of the old deal. It is all about empowering genuine, conscious choice.
So under the Sex 3.0 framework, both paths are laid out on the table as perfectly valid options. You can choose a fenced relationship, one based on sexual ownership, or you can choose an unfenced one based on sexual option. The key, critical difference is that the choice is made honestly and freely, without all that social pressure that defined the old deal.
Which brings us to the final and most important question the book leaves us with. What does your relationship map look like? Is it a map that you drew yourself consciously, or is it one that was just handed to you by society? According to Sex 3.0, simply understanding the difference between those two is the very first step toward actually navigating the territory successfully.